Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today I have with me Jared Bull. Jared is a transformation coach helping people to connect within themselves, bridging that gap between spirituality and inner knowing and the lives of purpose and value we are forging for ourselves along the way. But Jared has quite an interesting background that has led him there. Jared is a combat veteran of the Marine Corps, having served twice on tour in Afghanistan, the first at the young age of 18, and was in service for 4 years overall. So through a journey of self-discovery, where it seems like you really dived right into it, Jared now helps others understand their purpose through coaching programs around, drops wisdom bombs constantly around mindset, upper limits, conflict, attachment, avoidance, and showing up in conscious relationship, plus all of the other things that you do share. So thank you so much for your time and for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me here, Jess. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Perfect, my pleasure. So you do have such an interesting journey in terms of your career paths and the work that you've experienced, and there's huge juxtaposition in those as well. So from that background, so I really want to speak to that because it's very interesting, but from that background, from combat service to what you do now, can you share your biggest learnings and realizations around the differences in leadership and communication styles between the two for you? Or
Absolutely. Well, I think I'll point to this first. I think there's really a big shift that's happening in leadership just because of the way the world's happening, the way the world's operating right now. I've seen in the companies that I've done work within right now, 55% of the people who are in the workforce are millennials, and millennials have a specific value system. And the older way of working with fear, being a motivator, or carrots and sticks, like, oh, you'll get more time off or you'll get more pay. Like, those old motivational schemes are no longer working. And so leaders are really having a hard time figuring out, how do we motivate this newer workforce with a very different value system than our generation? And so I think one of the most important things that we can talk about when it comes to leadership is that, one, the current situation right now is it's completely changing. Like, no one really knows what's going on, in the sense that everyone's trying to figure it out. The older generation's like, why aren't these younger kids responding to us? And then the younger generation's like, why aren't they like listening to us? And so there's definitely this gap, which is so cool to see. And I'm honored to be in the middle of it, being 30 years old, doing work in the corporate world, but also coaching people online. So I got a really cool view of what's happening. And so the leadership styles is changing. And the most successful companies are going to be the ones who understand the value systems of their workforce and then build motivational schemes around those new value systems. And a perfect example, one of my clients here in Boulder, they're a printing company, and they're about 60 to 65% of their workforce is all millennials. And one of their CEOs, he was more of that traditional old style of leadership, which we call transactional leadership, which is just do as I say, not as I do. If you don't do it and you don't perform and meet these standards, then you might get on the chopping block. And it was it's transactional. Like, that's why they call it transactional leadership. It's like, here's your money, do the work. And like, it's that simple. But that's not enough for the millennial generation. The millennial generation, excuse me, has a value system of wanting to change the world, of wanting to have a big impact. And they'll actually, all the research is showing that millennials will take a pay cut if it means having more meaningful work, which to the older generation is completely unheard of. I mean, they had generational traumas around, insecurity from the Great Depression, economic crashes. So those financial security traumas play out into their value systems and thinking. And then you have the millennial generation who's like, well, I still want to make money and get security, but that's not most important. It's what my heart needs to be in it. And if my heart's not in it, then it's not worth doing. And so what's really cool is with the company, we got them to switch their model of leadership from transactional more towards transformational. And transformational leadership is being an inspiring character who can hold a vision up that gets people's hearts open, that gets people excited, and gets people wanting to do the work for reasons greater than their own personal gain. And so like that's a big difference. That was a pretty long-winded answer, but
no, it paints the picture though, I think, of the reality of how we understand leadership and how we collectively respond to leadership now versus how it might be being shown, or the old ways of doing things. As you said, like it feels to me like an old way of doing things. And I think as part of my work, that's kind of what I'm like rallying against as well. Is like, no, we don't need to be as stressed as we are. We don't need to like sort of shrink everyone down just to, the thing. What if we all lived in this sense of purpose and did what we love and shared what we love and everything like that? And then it makes this huge difference in the world, that everyone's a little bit happier and we're still earning and we're still thriving. Like, there's still value in that.
Yeah. Well, like human beings, we can trust them more than I think we give credit for. I think, like, yes, as a leader, the ultimate decision, I believe, should be with you. That's what it means to be a leader. You're taking responsibility for it in the sense of, okay, like this is how we're going to do it. I'm taking responsibility for it. But at the same time, human beings are a lot more capable than I think we give them. And so if we can give them the space to voice their opinions, or give them the space to run things in a way like they're adaptable. Like human beings are adaptable. We're adaptable. So trust that adaptability. That doesn't mean don't hire just anyone for, just anyone and everyone, but take on people who are adaptable, and don't be afraid to just give them a responsibility. With my team, I have a team of 4 under me or who work with me, who work around me. I don't like the term above or under. That's more hierarchical. I like around. I tell them what I want. I tell them my vision. And then I say, look, I don't care when you work, how you work it, like do whatever you have to do to get us to that vision. And like, that's it. And I'll check in with them, but like, I trust them. And they feel that trust. And because they feel that sense of trust, that gets them excited. They're like, cool, I can go after this however I want to go after it. And there's times where we do have to be stern and firm in the sense of, okay, we got to meet at this deadline or this date and things like that. But it's a balance. It's really a balance. Don't be afraid to give your people the reins that they're looking for. Like, don't be afraid to give them control. You just hold the vision up, get them excited, and then let them loose and see what happens.
What I'm hearing in that is this almost this letting go of the control and like the micromanaging of how it gets done. It's the when we can let go of the control and trust that how we're communicating our vision and how we communicate with that and how we communicate with these other humans as well, when we can just rely and trust on that rather than holding tightly that control, which defeats the purpose of hiring anyone else anyway.
Yeah
It's
I love that.
a huge difference.
Yeah I love that. I always say try, test, and trust. Like those are the three key words that I have in my relationship to the world. There's sometimes where I just need to trust and like, hey, you do whatever you need to do. And then there's other times where I need to try and see, are they ready for this? Are they taking on too much responsibility? Are they not? And then test it. Like, okay, I don't know. So I'm just going to test them and see if they're ready for it, great. If they're not, they're not. And so really having that relationship in leadership is like, that's like giving people freedom to mess up, but also to get in touch with their potential. And as a transformational leader, the best thing that we can do is see the potential within a person, see what they're capable of, inspire them to that level of capability, while at the same time giving them free range to create what it is that they want to create and for your vision.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that it's harder to do that if you haven't acknowledged that within yourself?
Acknowledged what specifically, Jess?
That's a good question. Acknowledge things around your own level of trust in your own self. So, like how you trust yourself to show up, or how you trust, like, there's an element of trust. So, if we do trust
Absolutely.
the outside world, it means that there's something in us we're not relaxing into and relating to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like last year, or no, 2 years ago, I hired a bunch of people and I did not trust my abilities to hire someone and to see whether they had the potential or the capability to create my vision. So I hired people and it just fell flat. And then I was like, well, that was a hard lesson. I need to relearn that one again. But this year, I've had the ability to really see what a person's capable of, to see what they can do, their trajectory. And now all I have to do is just say yay or nay. I was literally on a call with a saleswoman who I'm thinking about hiring, and I'm about 85 to 90% sold on her right before this conversation. And like, I knew she was, I know she's the right fit. I'm about 85% there. Whereas, I had a call last week with a guy and it was just like, I just knew. I knew right away it wasn't the right fit for him, and it wasn't the right fit for me, and it would just create more tension and stress for both of us if we tried to put a square peg into a round hole. And so it's yeah. So trusting, you have to. I went off a little bit tangent there, but yeah, it's learning to trust
Mm.
that ability, and the only way you get it is by putting yourself out there and getting the experience, and also having coaches and mentors and people who have walked further down the line than you. That's important too.
That's a really good point. Like, I always am sharing, like, I'm a big advocate of, like, we can't learn everything by ourselves. Like, this is how we learn. We learn by going to therapy, or having coaches, or having like this whole community and society that helps to give us a different perspective from the outside, or helps to share their perspective so we can choose and try things on and everything like that. And I feel like in leadership and communication, especially, because I feel like the two are intertwined. They're their own entities, but they play such a role in each other that they kind of have this balance. But I feel like in those areas in particular, for me at least, it has been through learning from others that has helped me define what that is for me, or define how I want to communicate and show up, or how I show up even to things like vulnerability and um,
Yeah,
hmm,
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah, we need those reflections. I used to be more of a closed off individual where I was like, okay, like I know what I'm doing. I trust my intuition all the time. I know that like I got this. And it's like that's useful for certain areas, but you want to be able to turn that off and on. And it's important to be able to it's important to know when to be like, okay, we just got to go. I trust myself. We just got to make it happen. And then it's important to also know and recognize our humanity and our interdependence upon one another, not codependence, interdependence. Like we really are all in this together, and we're all learning. Everyone's on their own journeys. Some people just have gone further than you. And if you want to speed your learning curve up, then it's definitely helpful to have a coach or a mentor or someone in your back corner who can see what it is that your mind is trying to learn and what it is that your mind is trying to understand. One of the last coaches I hired, it was terrifying investment. It was a $75,000 investment, and I had a breakdown before I did it and after I did it, literally like multiple breakdowns.
shit.
And yeah. And I remember making that investment. It was just like everything got to the surface. Like, can I trust this person? Is he worth like just everything? $75,000 will do that to you. I mean,
Oh,
$7,500 will do that to a lot of people. Like I have people who pay me, that amount of money, and they like break down, and I'm like, dude, I made a $75,000 investment. Like, so when I made that investment, I remember being really, really scared and nervous and worried. but it's saved me so much time and energy and effort. Like all the lessons that I've been able to learn since I've coached and mentored under this person, I already know that it's paid off itself. Like, and my tears of gratitude have proven that. Like my tears of, oh my God, this is terrifying. Like this is so much money. And then later on, my tears of gratitude, like, oh my God, yes, it was worth every penny. Thank God. Like, so it's important to have people in your life who've went further than you, so you can evolve, and they because they can see everything in your mind that your mind's trying to figure out, because that's all learning is. Learning is, I've never had this experience, so I'm going to throw myself into this new environment or this new experience. Whoa, I have no idea what's happening. I feel the stress in the body. Now my mind's spinning and I'm trying to figure out, what do I need to do? Is this the right thing? And it's like, oh, well, this is all your mind's trying to figure out. It's just, you're trying to connect A, B, and C. And then, so it speeds up having a mentor, a coach, people in your back court. It speeds up that process. And this, the journey of mastery. If you're on a journey of mastery and really wanting to master something, it's important to have that. It's important to go to the masters. That was why I did what I did. The person that I hired, he's been doing this work for 4 decades. That guy knows human transformation unlike anything else. Like he knows how to build a human being up and build a human being down, which is actually pretty powerful and kind of scary. But then that's what I wanted to learn how to do. How do I build myself up, and how do I build other people up? And, how do I tear down parts of the ego that aren't, helping us anymore? And how do I do that for others? And so, yeah, like it's important to have those mentors and those people who've gone further than us.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said to just having that sounding board of like, I think I know, but I just need to talk it out loud and have someone like feed that back to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That, like, because I want to touch on the work that you do, and especially lately, like I've been following your stuff for about 18 months now or something like that, and I've seen that journey in you as well, just noticing that difference, and noticing this year in particular there's been this really opening up in what you do share, and you've dived into things around leadership and purpose, which you were always kind of tapping into anyway, but you've also been sharing things around like relationships and showing up, and you mentioned before like interdependency versus codependency, and sharing the difference there, because that can be a really tricky one for a lot of people as well. And even in communicating in relationship, whether it's intimate relationship or like familial relationship or working relationship, right? There's an element of communication. And I feel like sometimes there's the element of vulnerability when you, like in relation to what you were saying about having someone to bounce off, or like people's journeys that might be a little bit further along than yours, like in a particular area, and that can bring up elements of vulnerability when you're trying to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
What does that, where is the, what do you think is the best way to kind of approach that feeling or that kind of scenario when that does show up?
And Jess, can you, the scenario of what exactly?
Of being in communication with someone to build a relationship of some kind. So again, of any kind of relationship, when you have this feeling of, oh, this person is further along than me, or this person, or just the feeling of, whether it's true or not, just the feeling of like putting someone up on a pedestal.
Yeah, beautiful.
That can come along with trying to show up and trying to share and be open. And
Gotcha. Yep. So the first thing that I think is most important to recognize is that we experience the feelings of our thinking. So, and what I mean by that is, if we think someone is further along than us, then we're going to feel lower than them. Like if they're like, oh, this person's further along, then we might feel lower than them. And then we might get mad or upset, and I feel lower than you, and then might act that out on them. And they might be like, what the heck? This person's crazy. Like where? So our thoughts are always creating our feeling states. I would say that. I'd say that's pretty true. That so if we're having certain thought, then that's creating a feeling state within us. That being said, every human being is trying to develop. Like as human beings, we want to be whole, and that's our natural state is wholeness. Our natural state is our natural whole developed state is I know how to make money and create wealth doing what I love. I know how to have happy, successful relationships. I know my sexual preferences and what I need there. I can communicate my feelings and thoughts, and I know how to be in social situations and adapt. Like that's literally our natural state. But what happens with people is they've experienced an environment or some sort of trauma in their life that has cut them off from their natural development to that wholeness. And so everyone's always going to develop in all those areas. Everyone's always going to go develop in business or in spirit or in their relations. And so if they have the right environments that are honoring all those aspects. Now, most environments in the world aren't. That's the sad thing is when I look out in the world, I just see, God, people are just screaming for their needs to be met. Like if we just allowed human beings just to develop in their natural course, we probably would have heaven on earth, to be honest. To an extent, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty bold claim, but everyone's always heading towards their fullness. It's just that we don't trust people to head to the fullness and the development of who they are. And so when it comes to these scenarios of developing, vulnerability and power dynamics, because that's really the question, that's the conversation we're having. It's a power dynamic. The best thing that vulnerability does is it just shows that we're both developing, and your person might be at one level, you might be at another, and you're just at different developmental stages. It doesn't mean that someone's better than you in the sense that you're like not worthy. Yeah, they might be better at you than that particular thing, but that's because they've had the resources, the environment, and like you're just at a different stage of development. And so I would say that if you're in a position where you get the sense that someone's above you or something like this, then just ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to learn right now? What is it that I'm trying to develop? And are they further developed than me? And if so, reach out to that person, like connect with them from the heart level. Hey, I get this sense that you're above me in some way. And I think what I'm trying to say is that you're further developed in this area. Can you help me? Like, that's what I do. Like, I remember when I had to do my taxes last year for my business, and it was the second or third year that I've done my taxes. I don't like doing my taxes. I hate numbers. I really don't. I don't like math. And so, and so I literally like my financial advisor, attorney, or however you want to call him, she was telling me all these things, and it was just going way over to my head. And I finally said, I said, look, you're an expert in your field. Talk to me like I'm a child, because I am a child when it comes to everything you're sharing with me. And then we were on the same page. Like, she wasn't frustrated anymore that I was like trying to get this. And I literally just said, talk to me like a child. And so don't be afraid to like do that. Like, don't be afraid to like, once you recognize, see, this is a problem. A lot of times in the world, people are walking around trying to be something that they're not. And like, I get it. Like I used to have imposter syndrome too. And like, sometimes people would come to me and they'd be like, I have imposter syndrome. And now I just say, well, like, what are you what are you doing that you're not yet? And like, that's okay. Like, give room and space for yourself to develop in some area. And like, that's why we're here. We're here to develop and grow and expand and try new things out. And so the first thing I always ask is, like, what are you developing? Like, what is it that you're trying to develop? Are you trying to develop the business side of yourself? Are you trying to develop the emotional side of yourself? Are you trying to develop the sexual side of yourself? And so like, every conversation I have with a human being, that's the first thing that I'm always thinking of. Like, what is it that they're trying to develop? And where are they in their developmental stage? And chances are, if you feel like you're lower than someone or something like that, they could just be an asshole. They really could. They might just be an egotistical prick who's like, I'm the best at this. And if that's the case, you probably don't want to talk to those people anyway, and they have a lot to learn, or they're just developed further than you in some area because they are. And if that's the case, like, own that. Don't be afraid to be like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. Can you help me? And you're going to get so much further quicker when you have that humility.
Yeah. And it also could be like a miscommunication, like between your financial advisor and you. She could have seen you as like this businessman who's like, oh yeah, he's all over this shit. He must know what I'm talking about.
Right.
You're like, hey, actually, this isn't shit that I really care about learning. So just talk to me. Like there's also like the misunderstanding or miscommunication of assumption that can show up in that as well.
I love that. Yeah. So speaking to the perception is what I call that. It's important to know how you're being perceived,
Mm.
and how you're perceiving others. And perception is created by thought and emotion. And if we're having a certain thought, then we're going to experience the emotion of that thought. And sometimes I'll have people talk to me and I'll be like, how are you perceiving me right now? Like, who are you seeing me as really? And
Yeah.
then they'll give me the deer in the headlights look. And then I'll say, can we talk about that? Like, cause it sounds like you perceive me one way, and I definitely don't feel like I'm being seen as who I really am. So can we talk about that? And you can clear the air, like communicate that, like bring it out into the open. And this is why vulnerability in business, in life, like literally there's a direct correlation I see between vulnerability and trust. The more vulnerable you are, the more trustworthy you are as a human being, because people see you. They'll see you. They'll be like, oh, I see this person, like you're being, and so they'll want like that creates the connection. So in business and sales, if you want to create the connection, be as vulnerable as possible, as quickly as possible. Like that, especially in today's environment where everyone's like, I'm an expert, and anyone can be an expert online really quickly. And then you can just send out ads and, so be as vulnerable as possible, to build the connection as quickly as possible. That being said, you also don't want to take away from the authority or your credit as well too. So it's like finding the fine line between being vulnerable, but then also not sharing so much to the point where like, dude, people don't actually really need to hear that. Like sometimes I see this in social media. I've been guilty of this too. But like sometimes I'll see coaches share stuff on Facebook and I'm like, that might have been a little like, do you really need to share that? Like, is that really serving people? And like, maybe it is, but maybe it's not. So and then that's a whole conversation in and of itself in the self-help industry, but.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I have the energy to go into that tangent right now, but
Right.
it's there is an element of vulnerability, and because it was brought up earlier around like that codependency and interdependency, if you were in like a friendship or a relationship and you sort of could see that you like that there was an area that you're wanting to grow that other person had or whatever it was, how do you or would you approach that? Like what's the difference, the delineation between that and then erring into codependency within that?
So I just want to make sure I'm hearing this right, because I had a couple thoughts there. Are you asking what's the fine line between codependency and interdependency?
Yes, but in the context of when you're asking like for someone to be like, hey, like, tell me, like, can I learn from you for this? Because we were talking about that whole element of seeing people at the different levels and different aspects and everything like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So
I
this is
stepping into codependency there and remain.
right. So that's an expectations conversation. Like, what are the expectations of the relationship? Like all codependency comes from unconscious expectation. I am unconsciously expecting that you take care of me. I am unconsciously expecting that. And I see this all the time because people throw their unconscious expectations on me all the time. And then they get mad at me. And then because that's just a part of being a coach. Like you see a lot of it. And so I'll say, well, what unconscious expectations did you have of me? And like, what did you place on me? And then they'll have to see that, and then they'll see how they created that emotional experience for themselves. I had this with a client just the other day She got really pissed at me over the weekend. I could see it. She got super, super pissed. And I asked her, I said, well, what expectations did you place? Like, what expectations did you place upon me? And then she went into it, and then she saw it, and then she was like, you know, and I have so much compassion for humans, because like I do this, not too much anymore, because I've had people call me out on it, but it still shows up sometimes. I still have my like moments. And for her, it was one of those, like all the stuff that I was blaming you for and all the stuff that I was upset at you for the whole weekend. It was because I was throwing these unconscious expectations on you. And it was like, yes. And you created that emotional experience for yourself. But that's what this space is for. That's why I'm here as a coach. Like, that's what you're learning. And so you learn. What I love about the coaching relationship is you learn through that person. And then when you learn through that person, you can take that out in the world. And that makes you a more powerful person out there in the world. So yeah, it's really funny when individuals have that experience. So in terms of codependency and interdependency, if you're a good leader, you'll know when people are becoming codependent upon you, and you'll speak to it. Like I have one of my guys who sends out some of my marketing materials, and I could see he was kind of leaning on me too much, and just kind of like more like, Dad, does this work? Is this good? Like, Dad. And so I said, well, what do you think? Like, I turned it back on him. I said, do you think this, and this is actually a coaching model that you can use in business. It's called the team management coaching model. When people come to you for the answer, you don't just give them the answer. You ask them a better question that allows them to access the innate intelligence and wisdom within them. And then you're building them to be independent. You're building them up to be independent. And so codependency and interdependency, all codependency comes from unconscious expectation that you're placing upon another human being. But if you're a good leader, then you're going to have those expectations. You're going to talk about those right off the bat. You're going to say, hey, look, this is what you can expect. This is what you can't expect. Are you okay with this? Here we go. So it's important to have that expectation conversation in all areas of life. Like, I remember I was dating one girl last year, and I was having the expectations, like we were filling each other out, but then I also brought in the expectations conversation. And she was like, you're treating this almost like a business transaction. And I'm like, yes and no. Like, yes, in the fact that, like, if I'm going to invest a lot more time and energy in you, like, I don't want to waste it. And if you're going to invest a lot more time and energy in me, I don't want you to waste it either. Like, do you know what you want? Are you ready for this? And so, like, that was a great conversation to have, because it was like, it cleared it up before it got nasty. Like, if you don't have expectations managed in the beginning, you're creating bad karma for yourself later on in the future. It's going to come back and bite you in the ass.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just thinking, like, because you do ask those upfront questions, like you've mentioned it already in this conversation of, like, what are your expectations of me, or how are you perceiving me? And I think those are good things, especially the expectations. Like, we could have them way sooner in the game than what.
Yeah.
But often I find it's that sense of vulnerability that can hold people back, either when it comes to, oh, I don't know what they're going to say in return, and I'm afraid of that, and I feel exposed and vulnerable, or I don't want to speak first because I don't want to be seen to be like jumping the gun or whatever it is. And there's that scariness in that kind of communication and conversation as well.
Right. And you can bring that into the communication too. You can say, like, hey, there's a part of me that's a little bit nervous because I'm thinking about this, but at the same time, I want to have this type of connection. And so I'm kind of just winging it. Like, I've literally had that with people. I've reached out to one person for an interview the other day, and they were just really, like, they were high up there in terms of like YouTube community. I think they had like 300,000 subscribers, and I wanted to get an interview for them. And there was some like miscommunication. There was just something going on. And so I spoke to it, and I said, like, what I was thinking and what I was feeling and what I was unsure of, and and it triggered her, but then, and like, which I was worried about happening, but it triggered her. But then we worked through the trigger, and like, we were on the same page. We were connected. So it's like, it's either you can be completely open and honest and vulnerable and scare a majority of people away, or you can communicate your vulnerability in a wise way, which is a skill to develop in and of itself. And you can actually create a really deep, authentic, quality connection. Like the more vulnerable and the authentic you are, the deeper connection you're going to have. But just know you're either going to scare the hell out of people and they're going to run and they're not going to want to be around you, or they're going to be on your side, and it's going to be one or the other. Like every single girl that I've ever dated is either like really, really likes me or like runs the opposite direction completely. And like, I'm okay with that. I'm in total agreement with that. Like, that's perfectly fine for me. Like, look, if I'm not your cup of tea, that is fine. Like, if you're looking for a guy who's not going to be honest and authentic and coming from a loving space, like I'm honest and authentic, but from a very loving space, because if you're being honest and authentic coming from any other place, you're kind of an asshole. So what's that?
You're just a jerk otherwise.
Yeah, you're just a jerk otherwise. So it's like, yeah, it's important to come from that. It's important to come from that space of vulnerability and authenticity. And some people that will scare away. And if that's it, that's fine. Like they might come back around on day 2 or year 2 or year 5 when they can handle that level of authenticity and openness and vulnerability. And the great thing about that too is like you're having a big impact on that person. Like if you show them a whole new way of being that they've never seen before and they get triggered and they run away, well, you still have made an impression upon them. Like those are those events or moments that people think about when they lie down at their bed at the end of the night and being like, oh my God, like, ooh, what was that conversation? Like, ooh, you know?
Yeah. And I've had a few of these conversations with people about like their fears in having like vulnerable conversations of all sorts. What happens, and it was just a question that came to me based on those conversations, what happens when you are in that person who's being vulnerable, the other person gets triggered or runs or whatever it is? How do you then take care of that vulnerability while still showing up?
Vulnerability within yourself? You just get used to it.
Yeah, it's just such a shit sandwich, isn't it? You just like,
yeah, it's just a new way of being. Like you just got to get used to it. Like my heart breaks all the time, and like it's not even a thing anymore. I'm just like, oh, like there it is, heartbreaking open on an even deeper level than I didn't anticipate.
yeah.
Like, oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And like that's what it means to live courageously from the heart. And eventually, here's the cool thing about it. Eventually, it gets to the point where your heart, like because it's broken open to that level, you're fine. Like it no longer is a heartbreak. It's just you living life. Like all heartbreak is a certain amount of energy coming through your heart space that you've never experienced or been aware of before. That's all heartbreak is. And so if you constantly break your heart open over and over again, eventually that heart chakra will settle and vibrate at a new frequency and stabilize. And then that will be your new setting. And then like those situations that were heartbreaking before won't be heartbreaking anymore.
Yeah.
Like now I show up with a woman, I'm totally vulnerable, open, share with her my vision, what I'm about, what I'm doing, ask her if she has the capabilities and the capacity to show up in that way. And that's not like on the first date. Like this is like over the course of like maybe like, 2 dates.
Yeah.
I'm just,
But not
I'm just kidding. So the point is like now I just show up like with my full heart open and like they either are like, wow, that's amazing, I love this, or they're like, wow, that's like too much and I'm scared. And like I've had women just like never call me again after that who I liked, and I was like, that was heartbreaking at first, and then now it's just like here it is. If you can't accept this and you can't see this or love this part of me, like cool, get out of the way, like go, because here's the fullness of who I am. And like, and it doesn't even hurt anymore. Like why would it hurt being who you are? And so it can be hard at first, but then that just becomes your new base. That becomes your new being. That becomes the new level that you show up as. And And when you're in agreement with that new way of showing up in the world and with yourself, it's not hard. Like, it's not hard. Like I own the fact that I'm going to scare the shit out of people, that I'm going to trigger some people, that people might see me as the devil, that others might see me as their savior. Like I'm fine with that now. Like, whereas before I wasn't okay with it. I was like, I don't want to take on all that. Now it's just like, yeah, if you see me as the devil, cool, that's you. If you see me as your savior, cool, that's on you. If you run the other way, cool, that's on you. If you stay in and pay me money for coaching, cool, that's on you. Like you just own it all.
Yeah.
And that's like a great place to get to. That's what a lot of human beings, I think, want to get to that place.
It's like a resilience without hardening.
That's exactly it. I love that. That is really cool. I've never heard that before. Resilience without hardening. Yeah, that's badass. I like that.
People will respond, you see the hardening, they're like, oh, I'm building up like this wall or whatever, and that way like that's how I'm expanding my heart and whatever it is. And it's like, no, you can build strength but still be soft and open and warm and loving and kind and caring and all of those things.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I remember this was a year and a half ago. I went to a coaching intensive, and I think I was the only male that like cried in front of everyone there. And that for me was just normal. Like, it was just like, oh yeah, like you just like you show your emotions. Like, why is that a big deal? But I remember I like cried, and I showed my emotions in front of everyone, and like everyone was like, oh, and like you were shocked. And then like I got out of it and I looked and I was like, this isn't a big deal for me, but this is all of a way bigger deal for you guys, apparently. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I was in LA, so no surprise. And I just remember thinking like, my God, is this really like the level that some of the world is at right now? Like, they're afraid to cry. Like, do you realize like we evolved to cry? So you send out a signal to your environment that you need support. Like, that's how we evolved. Like, that's the reason we have tears come out of our eyes and we get red eyes. And like, it's literally sending a signal out to your fellow human beings. I'm hurting. I need support. Like, that's how we evolved. And so like, I was just amazed. I was amazed by that. So like, vulnerability is our natural way of being. Like, we're meant to be vulnerable. We never were not meant to. So yeah, like, be vulnerable. It may be terrifying at first, but I promise you, your life will get so much better. You'll have support coming in. People will want you, like, yeah, like, be vulnerable.
Yeah. It's there's so much to that I want to speak to, but anyway, so there are questions that I ask everyone that comes on, just because it's nice to see that journey with self-reflection and everything like that. First one is, where do you feel like you do communication and leadership really well? Like, it doesn't mean perfectly, it doesn't mean you don't screw up from time to time, but where do you feel like you're pretty good with it now?
That's a good question. Where do I feel like? I definitely see people's trajectories now. Definitely see a person's trajectory. Definitely see their potential. Absolutely. So that's one area that I've really, really been able to increase, especially within the last year with working with Michael. I mean, I see a person's trajectory. I see where they can go and what they can do. And I know how to speak to it as well too. Like, I know, which is incredibly powerful when you can speak to a person's potential, like, and you hold that vision up for them. You're taking something that they can't see within themselves outside of them and then putting it in the external world, which is such a powerful reflection. Like, that and alone is worth paying people money for, hands down. So I always encourage everyone, get as many reflections as you can from really amazing people. Like get that, get as many as you can. So that's one thing. The second thing would be holding a vision up for someone, holding your vision for what you want out of them, and asking them to step up and live into that. That's one thing. And then the other aspect of that too is really seeing a person's capability and capacity, and then just holding that vision for them right up in front of them and asking them to step into it. And
Yeah.
like literally that's all you have to do as a coach. I mean, if I could talk to my former self 2 years ago, I would have said, just look at what's on offer for a person's life and then speak to it. And that'll create the sale in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It'll be in alignment with what they feel is like, it's building them up to find their alignment within that as well.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I would say trusting people more, hands down, trusting that people can get the job done. But that's also evolved with my ability to trust myself and choosing the right people who do have that capacity, because some don't. And that's okay. Like some people just don't. Either they got family situations going on, like medical stuff going on, and like that's just a part of life. But I really trust people now because I trust my own perception. It's really important to have a clean perception. It's really like perception really is power. It's power in the sense that you can see a train wreck coming from a mile away when you have true perception, and you can really see a person's potential when you have true perception. So if you refine your perception and you make a commitment to yourself to keep that in check on a daily basis, life will happen in a really beautiful, easy way because your perception is clear. You can avoid train wrecks and you can create and build good things.
I like that, creating and building. Where do you feel like there is room for improvement that you have in those areas?
Yeah, really great questions. Loving these, Jess. Really, it's cool to see these. These are great coaching questions. Improvements. Probably just owning it more. Really just owning it more. Like right now, it's the first time that I've had a team of 4 under me, and having a team with your own money on the line. That's very different. Having taxpayer, like I've had teams of 22 people under me, and like having someone else's money and livelihood on the line, like that's, or taxpayers' dollars, and leading a team of 22, like not as scary. Leading a team of 4, trying to be a good leader and with your own money on the line, that's a little different. That's a whole nother conversation. And so really just owning that more, I would say, owning my level of ability of vision, owning the fact that I've hired the right people and that I can trust them to execute on the things that they need to execute on, and releasing the reins there. I've really done a good job releasing the reins, but I think, like I tell them, hey guys, sometimes like you'll see me grip, like you'll see me get tight, like call me out on that. Like, don't be afraid to stand up to me. Like the best thing I think a leader can do is to tell his people to challenge him, and to tell his people to challenge him in a way, not from a place of like, you're an asshole, but the challenge from a place of, look, like I want to get to this vision. If you have a better idea, bring it forward. I want to hear it. And like, let's go into it a little bit. It's decision's going to be mine ultimately, but I want to hear more, and we'll go from there. So really creating that, like, know your weak points as a leader, and then build into your environment safety mechanisms that doesn't allow those weak points to get too out of control. It's one of the best things you can do.
Yeah. Did you experience much of that when you were in the Marines?
No, not at all. Because that some leaders a little bit, but that type of leadership really isn't. That type of leadership isn't condoned in the Marine Corps. It's just do as I say, and that's it. Now, there's great leaders in the Marine Corps. There's some people who lead by example and who do that, but it's pretty few and far between. I didn't get it at the level that I was at.
Yeah.
But I could see it in some others where they would say, hey, look, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I want to hear what you're thinking. I want to hear, like, tell me, like, what do you got for me? So it's it depends. It depends. I think that's the biggest area that I've definitely improved upon. And there's always more. I think there could be more room for improvement of knowing when to give the power away and say, hey, like, what do you got? And then at the same time say, like, no, this is, you just need to do this right now. And it just needs to be done.
Yeah, discerning the difference.
Yeah, discerning the difference. That's probably where I have more room to learn.
Yeah. And last question, where do you feel like there is room for improvement in those areas? Let's just say like in your understanding of the world. So it could be in your industry or within like people that you sort of tend to work with the most. Where do you feel like there's the most room for improvement needed in how we lead and communicate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would probably say to just be okay with the chaos. Like when you really look at the human condition, it's like, here's a planet that's becoming self-aware, and this planet is floating around space in the middle of a universe that has no orientation to itself around. Like, cut yourself a little slack. like, it's one thing just to make it through life and live it, and it's a whole nother thing to realize like what life actually is and like orient yourself. Like just getting an orientation. Like whenever I see one of my clients being too hard on themselves, because I have a tendency to do that from like the military and things like this, all I say is I just take them back to that metaphor. Like, think really about where we are as a species collectively, like in our own evolution. Like we're in the middle of space and we have no idea. Well, we have some idea of how the universe works, or we like to think we have some idea of how the universe works. At least that's what scientists do. But like really get a firm grip and understanding of your situation. Like that's really valuable. Like when you really get a deep understanding of where you're at in some area of your life, then you can actually make it better. And like that's what compassion does. Like compassion allows you to see the truth of what it is that you're trying to learn. Oh, I'm just trying to learn to do business really well. Oh, I'm just trying to learn to be a good husband, and I'm trying my best, and I didn't have the resources. Like I was speaking with one client the other day, and she's so hard on herself in terms of relationships. She's like, I should have this figured out. I've done therapy for 5 or 6 years, and I've dated so many men. And then I was like, well, let's slow down here. Let's look at the reality of it. Did you have any good models of relationships? And she was like, well, no. I was like, growing up, did you have any good models of relationships? And she was like, no. I was like, okay, so there's one. Do you have any really good models of good relationships in the culture? Like, is there, or is like at this big mass societal level? And she was like, not too many. I don't really see too many out there. I was like, okay, cool. That's fair. So have you ever taken any, like, aside from our coaching together, have you ever taken any like relationship courses and classes and things like that? And she was like, well, not yet, but now I'm definitely going to. And I was like, cool. So why would you be able to have a really great and beautiful relationship? Like you haven't had any good examples. You haven't had any models. You just started investing in yourself with me. So you're clearly headed on the right track. Like give yourself a break and understand just your situation. Like if human beings could just realistically perceive and see the situation that they're in, that alone is so powerful. Like that alone in and of itself is transformative. Just knowing what you don't know. There's like I remember, I don't know if you've seen this, there's this picture on social media. We'll close up here, but there's this picture on social media where, cause I'll just keep going, where it was like what I know. And then it was like 99% of like, or then there was like another 10% of what I don't know. And then there was like a 90% of what I don't know that I don't know. And like, that is so true. It's like, there's what it is that we don't know that we don't know. And that's why it's so valuable to have people in your life who have gone further than you, who have in the sense that they've developed onto higher levels, because those people will make you aware of the very things that you don't even know that you're not aware of. Like in sales conversation, quote unquote, sales conversations that I have, like that's the hardest thing sometimes. I'm just like seeing a gazillion things for this person. And I'm like, where do I even start? Sometimes like, where do I even start?
Yeah, it's almost like looking at the chaos, acknowledging the chaos, but not to control, but to cultivate compassion.
I love that. Yeah. To cultivate compassion, to understand where you're at and what your being is trying to develop. And that like, it's cool. Like if you die, like you'll probably get plenty of other chances.
Oh God, I'm tired already. Well, that is a really good note to wrap it up on. Before we do end, you did mention that you had something you wanted to share.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm really excited about this. I just finished up what I call the Book of Life. And the Book of Life is a class. Growing up, I was always told, Jared, there's no book to life. Like you don't get a guide to life. And it's true. Like no one hands you a guide to life. And so I thought, well, what if I created something that would allow people to understand how the whole thing works? When you understand how life works in a sense of you kind of get nature and you align to nature, then everything's much easier. But if you don't understand how nature works, how your own human nature works, and how nature of life works, when you don't have a clear understanding of that, life is always going to be harder because you're going to be working against the system. There's going to be friction. So what I did was I built a book. It's a 2.5 hour video class, but I call it the Book of Life, that explains to you all the dynamics, the inner dynamics of who we are as a human being, how we work, like the inner workings of who we are, and then also how that connects to the external world. This alone, if you know this, your life, just if you watch this for 2.5 hours and you take it in, not from a place of, I don't know if I agree with this, or I don't know, if you just take what it is that I've created for 2.5 hours, if you take it in from a place of what does this have to share with me? What insights about my own life and the way that it works can I take from this? It's going to change your life in a really profound way. Things will calm down. There'll be more peace in your system. There'll be less friction because it gives you an explanation of how we as a human being work. It gives you an explanation of what creates friction in the system, what creates anxiety. It gives you an idea of how we navigate the world as human beings. So if you want to download that, that's a long way of saying, if you want to get that, check out my website, transformationalcoaching.co, and you can download it there for free, 2.5 hours.
Put the link in the description of this video as well, everywhere where it's shared. But if you're listening to the audio version of this, yes, follow that link, but it'll also be in the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing all of your everything, your wisdom, all of it, and your time here today, Jared. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess. It's an honor and a delight to be here. I get excited to be able to share what it is that I know and love to do.
Yeah, that's very clear. So no, I'm very grateful to have you sharing and everything like that. So thank you so much.